Good morning. My name is Kelly Wathen. I've been a member here at Penny since 1985. I'm involved in a lot of different groups here at Penny and am so excited to be sharing the scripture with you this morning. So if you'd please join me, the scripture reading is Hebrews 11, verses 8 through 16 and 12, 1 through 3. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land. Like a stranger in a foreign country, he lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. By faith, Abraham, even though he was past age, and Sarah herself was barren, was enabled to become a father, because he considered him faithful who had made the promise. And so from this one man, and he as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and as countless as the sand on the seashore. All these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised, they only saw them and welcomed them from a distance. And they admitted that they were aliens and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinful men, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. This is the word of God.
Hebrews chapter 11, great hall of faith. And verse 8, the first verse that Kelly read is really an incredible sentence. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. He went out, I think as the King James says, Abraham went out not knowing. Abraham, father of the faith, is given to us here as an example, as a model in this. Now, why would someone do that? To head out on a journey not knowing where you're going. Well, actually, people do that, don't they? Have you ever gone out and gone driving in the great state of Maine looking to get lost on a Saturday afternoon just to see if you could? I know some people in here who do that. My wife, when she was moved down to Massachusetts, first she would go out and drive around and play the left-right game with friends, where you would just say, you would ask, each person would take a turn saying, you're going to turn left at the next intersection, right at the next intersection, and see what they could find. They went out not knowing. Have any of you ever done that? This is something some people do as a game, but we even have in history examples of people going out on really long journeys without knowing where they were going. The first settlers right on the river here, down by the river, the first native settlers came here exploring, not knowing what they would find, finding the river and a lot of fish and game and settling. The pilgrims who were about to celebrate came setting out with a vague idea of the new world, but certainly no pictures, no clear knowledge of everything that they would face when they got here. Or the pioneers who went out on the Oregon Trail, they set out in some way not knowing. And here, in a different way, Abraham is given to us as an example, a model of what the whole life of faith is like. For anyone who would follow the living God, for anyone who would trust the living God. The life of faith is a great journey in which we set out without all the details, without a full understanding of the final destination or even exactly what will lead for us to kind of get there. We are, in the church, pilgrims, pioneers. We are on our way somewhere, and the road there is not always crystal clear to us. This is what the life of faith is like. When you first came to faith, do you remember when you first came to faith? If you were a child, or maybe you were an adult, and you first came to understand something about Jesus, it was true, it was real what you knew. You gave your life to Jesus, and did you really know everything that you were going to face for following Jesus in the years ahead? Did you really understand everything that you understand now? Certainly not. You were just setting out. This is not just the start of the journey, but all the steps in between. You know, Martin Luther King said, faith is taking the first step even when you don't see the whole staircase. And this is what it is from the beginning of faith to all the different parts of our discipleship. When you first get married or become a parent as a Christian, one of my sons and his friend were talking a little bit about marriage, not imminently getting married themselves, but just about the whole prospect of marriage, and decided that it doesn't make a lot of financial sense to get married. Now, actually, I think the statistics show otherwise. It is a very good financial decision to get married. But you don't do it knowing that you're going to... that you don't do it for financial reasons with a guarantee of success. In fact, you set out as a Christian in marriage, which is a form of discipleship, not knowing what's going to come. I walked down the aisle with Kelly, and they told me I was now her husband, and I had a very small understanding of what that meant and was going to mean. You don't set out, you set out as a parent, without knowing where you're going. I know other people who have turned down relationships out of faithfulness to Christ, not knowing whether that would mean they would ever get married at all. People who start ministries, who pursue a vocation in Christ, who go forward with things that they believe God is calling them to, taking steps, not knowing how exactly they're going to get to the end. And then every one of us, if the Lord doesn't return first, will come to the end of life and will step off into the next life as a pilgrim going forward with trust, but with a lot that is unknown. We are pilgrims. We're pioneers. We're making our way through all of life like this, including difficult times of illness and loss and a winter with COVID. We go forward on a long journey, not really knowing where we're going. Well, if that's the picture of the whole thing, who does that? You know, who sets out on a great journey with lots of risk if you don't really, if so much is unknown? The first settlers set out looking for fish and game. The pilgrims came looking for religious freedom. They had a reason. Right? The pioneers set out looking for land. Why did Abraham go off not knowing? Why did he begin this pilgrim journey? Why did he set out as a pioneer? What was his reason, and what might be ours for walking this walk of faith? Well, I'll tell you one reason, at least a couple of reasons that are not the reason you would do it. Don't set out on the life of faith if you want more control. Look at what it says in chapter 11 about Abraham. By faith, when Abraham was called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. Now, if you think Abraham set off kind of like sometimes like he's like, I want to be my own boss, I'm going to go out into my own country and have a little more control over my life. If you think that is not why Abraham went out or what these verses mean, Abraham leaving was not an assertion of Abraham taking more control of his life. It was, in fact, just the opposite. Abraham was going into a land in which he would now be a foreigner, meaning an outsider, meaning he had no natural alliances. He had no tribe to back him up. He was more vulnerable to outside forces, not less. He had more things in a foreign country that were not under his control. Don't go out into the life of faith if you think it's going to give you more control. In fact, he lived in tents, meaning Abraham himself, his son Isaac and his son Jacob, never even owned the land. And in fact, of course, as we said, he went out not knowing, not even in control of the destination. God didn't give him the GPS coordinates. Some of us have a hard time just sitting in a room and not having control of the remote control. Abraham went out not in control of his final destination. We do not follow because we're looking for greater control. You know, there is a version of something claiming to be Christianity out there that speaks a lot about naming it and claiming it. Decide, and if you listen to it, it seems that this is saying that if you decide, you just decide the kind of life that you want and you believe that God will help give it to you. You just tell God, this is what I want, and then God will give it to you. Well, if that's your idea of what Christian faith is, understand that is totally foreign to Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Jacob. For Abraham, Sarah, and Isaac and Jacob, God named them and claimed them. He took control of their life and led them in a whole new direction in which they didn't even know where they were going some of the time. God called them to follow, and the life of faith in the living God is not a life that is your own in this sense. Don't set out on the life of faith if you want more control. And yet, Abraham went out, not knowing. Isaac and Jacob lived in tents. And the writer of Hebrews says, this is us too. So if we're not doing it for more control, why might we step out like this? Well, maybe, I'll tell you another reason why not. Don't step out on the life of faith if you're looking for greater comfort. Look at verse 13 now of chapter 11. All these people, it says, were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting they were foreigners and strangers on earth. They were in this very strange and uncomfortable position that they admitted they were foreigners, they were strangers, they didn't fit in. That's not a place of comfort. And he goes on to say, people who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. Verse 15, if they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had opportunity to return. He's saying if what they were looking for was a little bit more comfortable existence, they could have just gone home. They could have turned around. But the life of faith is not a life of us being in control, and it's not a life that's oriented toward greater and greater comfort. In fact, you see throughout this chapter that the inspired writer of Hebrews is showing us that faith is an active, vital, forward-moving, challenging thing. It is not just comfort like a warm blanket or chicken soup for the soul. It is a source of profound comfort. And yet, and there's no shame in that. We all need comfort. We all look for it somewhere. And the living God gives tremendous comfort to us. But faith is not only that. Faith is active. It is vital. It is moving. Abraham, by faith, obeyed and went. And if you want to see how vital, how vibrant, how even uncomfortable that life of faith sometimes is, look at down in verse 32. There's this wonderful summary. And what more shall I say at the end of this whole hall of faith, it's sometimes called in chapter 11. And what more shall I say? I do not have time to tell about Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, about David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, gained what was promised, shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength, who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Women received back their dead, raised to life again. There were others who were tortured, refusing to be released so that they might gain an even better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were put to death by stoning. They were sawed in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in sheepskin and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. The world was not worthy of them, and they were all commended for their faith. Faith in the living God is setting out. We're pilgrims. And we set out going where we do not know, not seeking better control, and not even seeking greater comfort. That's not promised here, is it? In fact, following God in faith can sometimes will lead to more difficult choices at times. You know, one of my favorite, a story that I love is the story of the little village of Les Chambon, I might be pronouncing that wrong, France, during World War II. So when France was occupied by the German soldiers, so Germany was in control of the whole nation of France and was continuing to enforce the Holocaust in that country, arresting and taking away Jews. This little mountain village of 3,000 poor people, over just a few years, saved 5,000 Jews, mostly children. They did it by bringing them into their homes and by refusing to turn them over to the police. They did this all organized by a Presbyterian pastor named André Trachmy. And it's an incredible story. It's been told by a few people. This whole village and this church said, we will not do this. They brought in people. They kept them. It's an incredible story, a magnificent story in many ways. But when one of the interviewers was asking Pastor Trachmy's wife, what was one word you would describe those years in which they were doing this incredible work? What word would you use to describe saving 5,000 people? She said, drudgery. That was her word. Because it was years of having regular house guests who they cleaned for and brought out new bedding for and fed every night. It was hard work. The life of faith is often hard work. We have dear friends who were foster parents. They took in a little girl, and they raised her for over a year. And just recently, very suddenly, and in a very, very difficult way, they lost her. She was taken from them to be placed somewhere else. And it's tremendously hard. I had the opportunity in talking to them. They're saying, just their hearts breaking. You are in this position because you followed Jesus here. Because you opened up your heart to take in a little girl. And you loved her so well that it breaks your heart to have her go. But you followed Jesus here. And because of that, it's beautiful. And the story's not over yet. But the life of faith is not comfortable. Well, so why would we do it? Abraham went out not knowing. He wasn't going out to get more control over his life. God took control of his life. He wasn't going out to get more comfort. He went into the most uncomfortable situation he could. And yet the writer to Hebrews says, this is who we are. We are pilgrims, and we have good reason to step out and take the next step on the staircase, even though we can't see the end of it. What reason did Abraham have, and what reason do we have? There are a couple here. And one is because of the longing that we have. We long for a better world than the one we can see. So did they. Look at verse 16. He had said, people who say such things, who say we are foreigners and strangers here. Verse 14, he says, people who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. Verse 16, they could have gone back, he says, but instead they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Picture Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob living in tents, walking this way of faith, not at home in this world, but longing for something better. A better country, a citizenship in heaven. Canaan, even Canaan, the promised land, was not their home. They were seeking, even Jerusalem, the great city of Jerusalem, the author of Hebrews is going to say, was not their home. They were seeking a better land, a better country, a greater city, a heavenly one. They longed for something better. And by the way, Friends, if the Jewish mothers and fathers of this faith could look at the promised land of Israel and say, this is great, but not home. Our citizenship is not here. Then so also American Christians have to look at this country and say, I'm grateful for it. I'm so glad. I want to be a faithful citizen of my country. But this country is not the home of my final allegiance. It's not my most important citizenship. I'm longing for a better country. My final destination is somewhere. My final hope is rooted in another city, in a higher citizenship. Why would people set out on this way of faith without all of these things? Because they're longing for something better. As one poet wrote, it's not for me to be seeking my bliss and building my hopes in a region like this. I look for a city which hands have not piled. I pant for a country by sin undefiled. If you long for a better world than the one you see, and you have hope of such a world being true, you set out in faith. Longing for this world. There's a German word for that kind of longing. And I don't know how to pronounce that any better than I know how to pronounce the French name of that little village. But it's something like this, Sehnsucht. It's an almost untranslatable word that means a kind of deep longing for a beauty and a goodness that is just outside of our reach. We know longing for something that we know is real, but we don't have. We know that kind of longing right now in this season of COVID, don't we? I long to see your faces, not just your eyes above the mask. We long to hear the voices raised and singing, to embrace, to eat together, to be together. We know that is real, and we long for it. And C.S. Lewis famously said that in every human being there is a longing, a deep longing for something that is real that this world cannot satisfy. A beauty and a goodness that is so good and so beautiful that we know instinctively is there. We seek for it in this world, but it's not here. And Lewis says that world is, that longing can only be fulfilled in God. He wrote, creatures aren't born with desires unless satisfaction for those desires exists. A baby feels hunger. There's such a thing as food. A duckling wants to swim. There's water. We feel sexual desire. There's such a thing as sex. He said, if I find in myself a desire which nothing in this world can satisfy, The best explanation is that I was made for another world. The life of faith is a journey forward together with this hope, that there is a greater hope of a higher healing, of a joyful reunion with one another, not only with one another, but with all those who have gone ahead, with embracing and laughter and tears and singing and feasting in a better country that satisfies the deep restlessness of our hearts in the presence of God. And by the way, this has application for us as well. Don't set your expectations and hopes. Don't put your hopes and expectations on achieving perfect happiness in this world. You'll be disappointed and you'll lose opportunities for gratitude. You know, C.S. Lewis also said, imagine two people who went out into the country to a rather plain hotel in the countryside. Two people, can you picture them being brought out to this rather plain hotel? One of them thinks he's being taken to a luxury resort. The other one thinks he's being taken to prison. Same hotel. The one who's expecting a luxury resort is like, come on, what's going on? The one who thinks he's been taken to prison says, you know, this isn't really that bad. Lewis's point is, our expectations change a lot. If you expect this world to be the place of final happiness, you'll be disappointed and lose opportunities for gratitude at the goodness that God gives even in this fallen and broken world, with the hope of a better country. The writer of Hebrews says there's a reason why we're pilgrims. We're going somewhere outside of this world. We have a hope, a longing for something that is beyond this world that ultimately can only be found in God. But there is one last reason, the greatest reason why we would set out on this life of faith, as difficult as it can sometimes be. Because the writer of Hebrews says, by the grace of God, we have come to see and to trust one who goes out before us, leading us on. The writer of Hebrews calls this one the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. He's the reason we take the next step, not seeing the end of the staircase. We'll look at chapter 12, those last verses that Kelly read. The end of the great faith chapter. Inspired writer of the book of Hebrews, says these words, great words. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. He gives us a vision of the end of the journey. I imagine a great marathon that, like the Olympic marathon, that ends then in the stadium. They run into the stadium, come in with the roar of all the fans around them, encouraging them. And here he pictures the end of the race, coming toward the end. And he encourages the Hebrews to imagine all the great heroes of the faith, the people who've gone before us, seeing, cheering, standing before us. He imagines a stadium full of them. And here we go, surrounding. He just says, keep going. Don't stop. Keep walking. All these people who've gone before you testify to the fact that God is trustworthy, that the end is good. Keep going. You're surrounded by this great cloud of witnesses. And yet, he says, our eyes in the whole stadium ultimately focus on one face. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. He's the pioneer of our faith, even more than Abraham. He went before us walking the way we should have walked. Didn't he surrender in his human nature, demonstrating perfect trust in the Father when he prayed, "Thy will be done"? Didn't he give up comfort? Wasn't he known as a man of sorrows, familiar with suffering? Didn't he proclaim a greater country, the kingdom of God, breaking in? He is the ultimate pioneer of our walk of faith, and our walk is his path. Our way is his way. When you walk this way of faith, you are walking in his steps, in a trail he blazed. He is the pioneer of the faith. And don't you see, Jesus never says to us, go out there and we'll see see what happens. Jesus says, come here where I have gone, and I will show you the way. We fix our eyes on the pioneer of our faith and the perfecter of it. Because he went in ahead on our behalf. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. This is why the writer of Hebrews can say he's the perfecter of our faith. He does not say, keep going to perfect your own faith. He says, Jesus is the pioneer who shows you the way, and he's the one who, even by his grace, will perfect the faith that you have, because he did everything that was needed for our perfection through his death on the cross. Just 2 chapters earlier, the writer of Hebrews says this about Jesus. For by one sacrifice, he has made perfect forever those who are being made holy. That's you and me if we trust in him. He has made perfect forever those who are being made holy. In other words, Christ's one sacrifice does it all. It does everything that is needed to achieve for us right standing with God, to clothe us in his righteousness, to wash us clean from sin, so that even while he is making us holy, even while he's sanctifying us and making us better, we are at peace with God. And we have a God then, because of what Christ has done, who is not ashamed to call you his own. Who's not ashamed even to be called your God. He's the perfecter of our faith. Through the cross he endured. So as you struggle forward into the arena, as you go forward into hard times of faith, you fix your eyes on Jesus, and what do you see on his face? The one who died for you. Is he checking his watch? Is he distracted, cheering on others? Is he frowning? No. He has walked this way ahead of you. He now names you and claims you and calls you home to the joy of his eternal welcome. He endured the cross for the joy of bringing you home to a better country. So this is what the church is. We aren't in the business of gaining more and more control over our lives, or even seeking out more and more comfort. We are a pilgrim people who have hope because of Jesus of a better country and a final welcome from the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. So, Penny Memorial, since you are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, throw off everything that hinders you. Get rid of the sin that so easily entangles you. and run with perseverance the race marked out for you, fixing your eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of your faith.